Hello! Hope you guys had a great Easter break. And I know it's Monday, you don't have school today, so I hope you're enjoying the weather and I hope you're enjoying something fun outside. So you guys are on the home stretch of this class, and I totally appreciate the work that's putting into it. In fact, I have had the best time ever looking at those puppet plays. They are so great, so imaginative and creative, and some of you pick like the easiest puppets, which I love. I love it because then that would be something that you could take into your classroom. So if you have like pipe cleaners or popsicle sticks or something very, very simple, those construction paper puppets, those finger puppets, give them to the students and have them act out different problems. One situation that I was talking to one of you about was like, if you use these puppets, you could definitely work out some social, emotional situations that have happened before. Sad story about puppets. One time when I was in kindergarten, teaching kindergarten, one of our students, he's 5, and his little sister died. And it was heartbreaking for the whole town, and it was sad, and it was terrible. And eventually this little boy was going to come back to kindergarten. And how do you handle something as big as death? To a 5-year-old and to a group of 5- and 6-year-olds, because they all knew him. He was a cousin to several people in the class. It was a small class. We knew the family well, and it was heartbreaking. One of the things we did is a counselor came in and said, use puppets. Like, this is what we're going to do. And so all of my kindergartners had these little fake puppets. They were actually bees, and some were like flowers, and some were rabbits, and these little bees. And then we would talk out like what we would say to the student when the student comes back, because we didn't want to say anything that would make the student feel bad or relive memories, but we also wanted to let him know that this was a safe space for him, and that we loved him, and that we cared about him, and we were thinking about him. And this was a Christian school, so we were praying for him at the same time. So the puppets that we used were kind of talking about, like, if we were this bee and then this little boy was the other bee, what would we say to him when he comes back into our classroom? And when the counselor had mentioned using puppets as more of like a social emotional therapy type thing instead of just entertainment, it really changed my aspect of how this can work for young minds. And so just keep that in mind, that puppets are entertaining, they are fun, they help with reading skills, they help with language skills, but they can also help with those bigger situations that we just didn't know what to do with. When the little boy did come back to our class, we had talked to the students about not saying anything about dying or death, but saying things about how we're happy to see him, we're glad he's back, we've been praying for your family. And then when he had brought up about his sister, then we were able to talk about it, but we weren't to bring it up to him. That was how the counselor had helped us through that situation. So puppets can be a fantastic thing. But your guys' puppets were amazing, and I'm so happy that you were brave enough to do that. So thank you for doing that. I think that that's going to do you well in the future, because there's so many things that you can work out of just having simple puppets. Another one of you I was emailing with, we chatted about what can we do, how can we have a teaching moment with these puppets aside from the obvious. And then when they get a little bit older, how about you have them write out the puppet scripts, and that would be part of your writing, or that would be part of your reading, or if they would read a story, and then how can we make that into a puppet play, and then give each student like the power of the pen kind of things, and they're going to be the ones writing down what's happening with the puppets. So that was kind of a good idea. One of you put little pictures, like faces, of the students on the puppets. That's a fantastic idea, because that way that puppet can be in several different shows, it can be in several different situations, and it wouldn't just be like a one-hit wonder when it comes to those. Another thing I found with puppets that was good with especially little kids is if we had practiced something and we had done a story over and over and over again, I put that all in a Ziploc bag and put it in the play area, and oftentimes the students would go back and open up the Ziploc and make those puppets redo the puppet play again. So it was something that they chose to do over and over and over again. I think it's a great idea. Okay, so on to this next week, new things. So we're talking about fantasy, realism, and in your textbook, we're going to start on page 309, and that's the chapter 9 we're talking about. Don't feel like you have to read this from front to back, but it'd be a good idea just to look over it, just to make sure you're familiar with fantasy and realism and what those kind of genres mean. The book we're reading this week is called Coraline. Coraline is a dark book. It's dark, and I would definitely say read this book first before you ever assign it into your classroom, just because you're not really sure. I mean, you're going to know your students better than anybody else, and you're going to know how they react to things differently than anybody else, so if this is appropriate for them or not. The students that I had read this book loved it, but also I had them read it, this was years ago before the actual movie came out, and I think the movie's a little bit dark, so same thing with that too. Pre-watch your movies before you put something in the classroom, but I would definitely pre-read this book before you jump in and read it or to the kids. I personally loved The Graveyard Book, written by Neil Gaiman, and I did like Coraline too, but you have to go into it knowing that this is a fantasy book and it does have a little bit of darkness to it. So I was going to jump in and show you, actually Coraline's got a really great Wikipedia page, if you can even believe that. So the story that we're reading today, or this week, is Coraline. It does give you a synopsis of the plot, but honestly, it gives you a great idea what's going on in the book, but honestly the book is so easy to read. It's a fast read. You're going to get it done within, a short amount of time, and it's entertaining, and so it'd be, in your best interest to take the time to read the entire book. I know this time of the year is really hard to jump in on big projects, so that's why most of your big projects are kind of over in this classroom. We're just kind of dwindling at the end, so hopefully all that stuff can get caught up and you can get going on it. But it has a list of characters, and you can kind of look through here. It has what connections it makes to the real world. Did not know that there's a segment of The Simpsons kind of based on the book Coraline, which is kind of funny. So when you read it this week, you're going to have kind of the fantasy realism genre in the back of your head. Be aware that it is a dark story. It's not suited for all children and all ages, but it is definitely something you should pre-read before you read it into your classroom. Chapter 9 in our textbook is going to give you more of the realism and fantasy genre, if that's something that you're interested in. I am not a big fantasy person, but I made a point to do it in my classes because I know just because my tastes are not that way does not mean it's not for everybody. So we did read, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. We did read Jumanji, things like that were high interest to some students. May not be every student, but it was high interest to some. And so you really have to make sure you have a good basis of all your genres going into your children's lit kind of section of your classroom, just because it's going to affect everybody a little bit different, and somebody might love it, somebody might hate it, but you got to give those options to everybody. Okay, so for this week's assignment, there's no actual written assignment for this class. We're just going to be doing it in discussions. In discussions, please feel free to throw a video up there of yourself talking about this, or you can type it out if you want, whatever works best for you. To me, I think videos are easier because you can just say it and it's out in the world instead of typing all that stuff. But if you are not comfortable with that, that's completely fine. You can keep to the discussions as well. So what I want you to talk about, this discussion for Coraline, is how are you going to do an extension activity of this book? I know I talked about this last video on things you could broaden on what could you do inside of this book that might be a little fun. I had mentioned something about different art projects and shadow puppets and shadow art and those kind of things. Because not every book is something that you have to teach somebody about. This isn't going to be a teachable moment. This might just be for fun, but there's definitely times where you can do extension activities to go with it that would make things a little more fun. So your job is to find an extension activity. What would you do to extend this book into other areas? Whether that could be art or music, or if you can think of something how it would connect with social studies or science, that would be fantastic. But if you can't, we'll just stick with the ones that are more of the art type of subjects. So after Coraline, you are going to come into discussions and tell us how you would extend, what extension activities you would do in your classroom to extend this book. And I would highly suggest when you're thinking about your classrooms, it's important for the students to read stories like this, but it's also very important for you to read stories like this to students. So then you can be there to support and guide and maybe explain a few things that were confusing. I read aloud to my students every single day, and it became one of those things that was just kind of sacred time, and the students loved it. And once we got into the routine of things, it was something that we looked forward to every day. In fact, for their birthday, to how we celebrated their birthdays, is if you had a birthday that day, you got to pick out the favorite part of a book that we had read before, or a favorite book that you had, picture book that you had loved, and then that's what we read for your birthday. And it never fails. One year in, I was teaching 3rd grade, and I had 7 students. 7 different birthdays, 7 different students, all picked the exact same chapter in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's the day that he finds the golden ticket. We all know what happens. We all see this before. This is not our first rodeo. We had read the book, and we had read it 7 times afterwards, but there was such an emotional connection to that chapter that so it was their birthday, and they got to sit with their cupcakes, and we got to pick whatever book or section that they wanted to for our reading time for their birthday. 7 of them picked when Charlie got the golden ticket. It was such a good portion of that book, because if you've read the book, oh, it's so much better than the movie. So much better than the movie. Anyway, that was like the best part. And of course, we had several other students that wanted to read, a different part of a different chapter book or a different picture book that we had read. But it was such a personal connection with my students that it was pretty fantastic. So I hope you end up having those connections with your students as well. I had another student, and this is a different class, a different school, that we had reading time after lunch every day. And so we would go from lunch, and then we'd all go to the bathroom, wash our hands or whatever, and then we'd come back to our classroom and sit down and read. And apparently I had used some lotion and from my hands after that, and then one of my students came up to me later and smelled my hands, and she was like, "Oh, you smell like just because of Winn-Dixie." And I was like, because of Winn-Dixie, that's what I smell like? That's what she remembered. The lotion that I had is like remembering the book that we were reading at the time that I had that lotion on my hands. So, it's a powerful thing. Even if you think it's something that's not going to be with these students for a long time, it truly, truly is. And if you are not read to when you were growing up in a classroom, I think you are maybe missing out and we're given like a disservice, because reading to children really is one of those things that it's enjoyable for you, it's enjoyable for them, and if you get into a routine, it really is one of those things where you can help them just love books. So when you are reading Coraline this week, keep that in mind. Know your students, know your content. Hopefully you'll see if this book is appropriate for your students or not. And then I want you to think of an extension activity to go with this book. So your discussion will be, what extension activity are you going to do? So you can either throw us a link, talk to us about it, however you want to discuss that. But that will be due next week. And like I said, Coraline's a pretty quick read, so hopefully you won't have to take a lot of time out of your week to do it. I know how busy you guys are getting, so I totally get it. Okay, that's all I have for this week. Please keep the videos and the emails coming. I appreciate hearing from all of you and talking to all of you. If you have any questions, please ask. Please also keep in mind that annotated bibliography is due in a couple weeks, and that's a big sucker. So if you're having questions with it, let me know. Some of you have emailed me like the first parts of it, and just to make sure you're on the right track, and so I've pre-read them and emailed them back. I'd be happy to do that with any of you, but we'll keep up the great work. All right, I will talk to you next week. Thanks.